Good morning and greetings to all. My name is John Lindsay Poland. I work with the Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico project of Global Exchange. And we're welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this webinar on the deadly trade of European and Israeli arms exports to Mexico. Este webinario está interpretado del inglés al español. Si quiere interpretación al español, por favor apriete el botón debajo de su pantalla, que tiene el globo, y escoja el español para escuchar el español. This webinar is also being interpreted simultaneously into Spanish. Anyone who wishes to hear the Spanish may click on the globe button at the bottom of your screen and choose Spanish. We want to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for supporting this project, and Global Exchange and Rompeviento TV for live transmission. What you will hear today is based on a report with the collaboration of researchers and activists from 7 different countries that export or import arms that are used in accelerated violence in Mexico. This report has been put together by the organizations Global Exchange, Desde in Belgium, Opal in Italy, Agir pour la Paix and both in Belgium, American Friends Service Committee in Israel, Ohne Rüstung Leben in German, Nesenuti in the Czech Republic, and the Mexican Commission for the Defense and Promotion of Human Rights in Mexico. We will be issuing a report on December 9th. Today you will hear part of a beginning of that report, which we explore and document in much greater detail when the report comes out. This will be simultaneous with extensive reportage in several international media outlets. Weapons companies based in Europe and Israel have exported more than 238,000 firearms to Mexico for use by state and local police between 2006 and 2018. Both state violence and homicides have increased dramatically during this same period of gun sales to police. The weapons were sold to police in every single one of Mexico's 32 states. The vast majority of these weapons, more than 95%, were classified as for military use under Mexican law. What we are presenting to you today is based on a year-long compilation and a review of more than 9,000 pages of receipts and end-use certificates for weapons transfers to state and local Mexican police that were obtained from the Mexican Army by Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico, which we obtained through formal information requests to the Army, which is also responsible for all legal firearms imports into and transfers within Mexico. Weapons transfers to federal and military and police agencies are less transparently documented, but we report on these as well. So to begin our presentation today, we will hear from Daniel Mata, who is a researcher with the Mexican Commission for the Defense and Promotion of Human Rights in Mexico City. And I will just say for all of you attending, feel free to share questions and comments in the chat on Zoom or on Facebook Live or YouTube, if that's the way you are receiving this. And we will attend to those after the presentations. Daniel, take it away.
Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Well, I would like to address the issue of why it is important to talk about firearms and serious human rights violations. Um, Let me start by saying that all armed corps are lethal, even those equipped with the misnamed less lethal weapons or ammunition like rubber bullets or tear gas. From all sorts of weapons, a firearm is any weapon which will expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. Almost any improvement in a firearm or cartridge that you can think of means an increase in lethality because they are military tools. We can think about range, penetration capacity, accuracy, rate of fire, etc. Just look up the history of the AR-15 pattern rifle or the FN FAL. These weapons were originally intended for military use, but now are widely used by police corps, not only in Mexico, but around the world. This is the main reason why firearms need to be properly managed and distributed. The United Nations have promoted various instruments that seek to regulate the use and traffic of firearms by state agents and private actors under the subject of small arms on light weapons. Without intending to go too deep, let's say that the topic has been addressed since 2001 at the United Nations Conference on the Illicit Trade in Small Arms and Light Weapons in all its aspects and the Program of Action. According to the definition established here, small arms and light weapons are any man-portable lethal weapon that expels or launches, is designed to expel or launch, or may be readily converted to expel or launch shot, bullet, or a projectile by the action of an explosive. All sorts of revolvers, automatic pistols, rifles, carbines, submachine guns, assault rifles, and light machine guns fall under the category of small arms. So in this presentation, I will use both terms indistinctly. According to researchers Barbara Fry and Edward J. Lawrence, the conference and the program of action focused primarily on preventing illegal transfer arms that ended up in the hands of unauthorized non-state actors and the impact this could have on national security, rather than addressing the harm caused by domestically sanctioned possession or use of firearms, and the ways that states themselves were carrying out violations with firearms or as acquiescing in firearms-related violence by private actors. This is problematic because small arms have a multiplying effect of human rights violations. As Barbara Fry notes, a single weapon misused can change the fate of an individual, a family, or even an entire community. A flood of small arms can shift the entire balance of power in a community, leading to a lack of personal security that destroys the rule of law. Firearms are used to facilitate the commission of arbitrary executions, torture, forced disappearances, sexual assault, and forced displacement by security forces, among many other human rights violations. This issue has been partially addressed in some UN's instruments, such as the Code of Conduct for Law Enforcement Officials, the Principles on Effective Prevention and Investigation of Extralegal, Arbitrary, and Summary Execution, the Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms by Law Enforcement Officials, and the UN's Subcommission on Human Rights Principles on the Prevention of Human Rights Violations committed with small arms. To illustrate how firearms can be misused to commit human rights violations, we'll take on account these last principles. This document draws some elements from the previously mentioned documents and was endorsed by the UN Subcommission, well, now extinct UN Subcommission on Human Rights, and it aims to provide a soft standard for preventing human rights violations with firearms based on the concept of due diligence. In the context of this document, due diligence means, in a broad sense, that the state has the duty to ensure the proper use of firearms by law enforcement officials in order to guarantee the core rights, that is, the right to life and security, granted by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Here, we will mention only a few ideas outlined in the principles. There are 9, but I'll talk about just 4 to illustrate the ways in which firearms may have helped in the commission of serious human rights violations, and also because they highlight areas that the Mexican state needs to improve. As you may see, these points are not mutually exclusive, but complementary. The first point is the adoption and strict enforcement of rules and regulation on the use of force with firearms, the delimitation of a clear chain of command, the prior operational planning to avoid use of armed force, necessity and proportionality criteria, and procedures for storage management of small arms. Um, in regard with the first point, well, there is a lot of evidence of misuse of force with firearms by Mexican authorities from the three government levels, let's say the federal level, state, and municipal. At the federal level, from 2006 to 2019, about 104 preliminary investigations have been initiated for the crime of homicide committed with public servants. In regard to these investigations, the Fiscalía General reported that he had indicted about 88 public servants and consigned another 27. According to some transparency answers provided by 21 of the 32 state prosecutor offices from 2006 to 2019, about 709 criminal investigations were initiated by the criminal intentional homicide committed by public servants. Among the authorities charged are predominantly military elements as well as federal, state, municipal, and ministerial police. Also, from 2006 to 2019, the National Human Rights Commission has received a total of 20 complaints for summary or extrajudicial execution. And according to the various state human rights commissions, for more or less the same period, about 206 complaints of summary or extrajudicial executions were filed at the state level. Guanajuato was the state with the highest number of complaints, about 62, followed by Coahuila and Sinaloa with 22 complaints each. Now, according to the EMPOL survey, this is a survey made by the Instituto Nacional de Geografía y Estadística, about 9.6% of people who were detained by the army got shot despite the fact of not having resisted arrest. This share increases to 11% in the case of people detained by the Mexican Navy, and to 6% in the case of people detained by the federal police. Uh, municipal police and ministerial police are about to share is about 4%, and that's it, I think. But people are also shot in custody while being transferred to public prosecutor's office. According to this survey, about 5% of people detained by the Mexican army were shot in custody, 5% by Mexican Navy, 3% by federal police, 3% also by some sort of state police, and almost 2% by municipal police. So this shows that there is a misuse of force by authorities, even when it is completely unnecessary. Now, for the second point, the clear chain of command. In Mexico, it's not unusual to find patterns of intervened chains of command, especially when it comes to local police. Just to mention a few cases, we have the Allende massacre in Coahuila, where at least 300 people were disappeared and shot. According to testimonials of surviving people, houses were bulldozed, and the attack lasted about 5 days. Authorities refused to do nothing about it, and it is said that the local cartel ordered the municipal police not to intervene. There is also the case of 10 disappeared hunters in the municipality of Joaquín Amaro, Zacatecas, who were also detained by municipal police and handed over to a local cartel cell. The disappearance of 5 young friends in Tierra Blanca, Veracruz, who were also detained both by state police and handed over to another cell from the Zetas, I think. But at least 202 more people are known to have been disappeared by the state police during the now indicted former governor Javier Duarte's term. There is also the case of the disappearance of the Ayotzinapa students in Iguala Guerrero. And recently, we have the opportunity to publish a book where we analyzed the recommendations of the National Ombudsman. We also find that the most colluded authority with drug cartels were Policía Municipal. In our study, we found that almost 40 people were disappeared in events that involve criminal organizations and municipal police. 8 people disappeared in events that involve the Policía Estatal and also criminal organizations. So this shows that sometimes the chain of command is not really well defined, or at least is intervened. Now, the last point that I would like to talk about, well, the last 2 points, is the prior operational planning to avoid use of armed force and the proportionality criteria. Mexican police corps have a historical record of brutality and unjustified use of force. Let's just remember the case of Atenco, Estado de México, the Nochistlán case also, and just a few weeks ago, the Cancun police shooting a feminist demonstration in Quintana Roo. Lastly, the procedures for responsible storage and management are obscure. According to sorry, forgot the word. A transparency request we sent a few months ago, about 60,685 weapons got lost or stolen between 2006 and 2019. The federal government institutions were the main authorities that got lost or stolen weapons. About 50% was lost or stolen to the FGR, 44% to the federal police. The second government who lost more weapons was the Ciudad de Mexico. About 82% of lost weapons were missed by the Secretaría de Seguridad Pública, the police. Guerrero, 82%, Chihuahua, 82% also, and Veracruz. So, according to Sedena, these weapons were left forgotten in public spaces or stolen from off-duty police officers. We don't really know where these weapons end up, because this info is really hard to find, as there is a lack of transparency, as we know, and sometimes the authorities claim not to have records on the issue of lost and recovered firearms. So now, because I don't want to extend too much, I will end here and pass the word back to John. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Your presentation really brings home the point that firearms are not just used in violence when someone pulls the trigger, but in other types of violence where the armed capacity of the state is used to carry out violations, whether it's firing a weapon at a protest, a feminist protest, or forcibly disappearing people where there's never any firearm or bullet that's found at the scene, or other types of abuses such as torture. So thank you so much for that. Our next presentation is from Carlo Tombola. Carlo lives in Milan, in Italy, where he works as a teacher and researcher, and collaborates with the organization OPAL, which is an observatory on small weapons, small arms, and recently founded a research center for studying maritime defense logistics. So thank you, Carlo, for being with us today.
Good morning at all. I share the screen above all.
And you may wish to turn on your camera.
Okay. There is my organization. Thank you for your invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Today I'm going to talk about Italian weapons used by police in Mexico. For many years, Italian small arms manufacturers have made Italy among the top 3 gun exporting countries in the world, which amounts exceeding $600 million per year. So it is not surprising that after the United States, Italian small arms are the most widespread in Mexico. Weapons that are made in Italy are also widespread in the US, as they have been adopted by the US military. The Mexican gun market is also saturated with Italian products that are manufactured or distributed by the US branches of major Italian companies such as the Beretta Group and Fiocchi Munizioni. Weapons that are manufactured in Italy are destined for the civilian market, including police agencies, don't need specific authorization and can be shipped from Italy with simple administrative documentation, which does not include any end-user certification. In the period of 2007-2019, Italian companies introduced a veritable river of weapons to the Mexican market, with a yearly average of 10,000 pistols and revolvers and 1,100 rifles. There is evidence that during the first half of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit northern Italy hard, the Beretta Group significantly increased firearms sales to Mexico. Weapons manufactured in Italy that are intended for foreign military use must be authorized by in Italy by a special office of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, while end-user certificates are required but not published. Permission is granted for firearms purchased by foreign entities or state agencies whose status is confirmed by supposedly reliable intermediaries like banks, foreign trade insurance, etc. Authorization is only denied to countries listed by the United Nations and European Union, subject to an international embargo, even though Italian law requires that they be denied to all countries at war or where human rights are seriously violated, or weapons can be used against the civilian population. Single authorization can also be given lasting several years, as in the case of the supply of 10,000 spare parts for Beretta semi-automatic pistols in 2018-2019, or the supply of 260 Benelli rifles from 2015 to 2017. From 2007 to 2019, the Beretta Group supplied the Mexican military in different models and calibers, and including huge stocks of spare parts and accessories, with thousands of automatic assault rifles, semi-automatic handguns, long guns, and sniper rifles. In the last decade alone, Beretta sales to Mexico generated revenues of at least $26.8 million US. In 2018, a new entry arrived on the Mexican military market. Prima Armi, based in Turin, a smart company that was authorized to resell M4 type assault rifles imported from Switzerland and the United States for an amount exceeding $500,000. In particular, the Beretta Group can use its multinational and multi-brand structure to avoid the controls and limitation of national legislation. Finished weapons, spare parts and accessories that arrive in Mexico start from two main Italian plants, Brescia, Beretta brand, and Urbino, Benelli, and from the plant based in Finland, Sacco, Turkey, Stoga, and in the United States, Beretta and Benelli USA in Maryland and Tennessee. According to recent bills of lading, the main supply chain starts from Brescia, travels by truck to the German port of Bremerhaven, then by vessel to the port of Norfolk, Virginia, then by land or by air or by vessel from the port of Norfolk to the final destination of Mexico. As you can see in this last slide, I have briefly summarized the leading role of Beretta. Mexican police in all 32 states purchased in great numbers Beretta weapons that largely ended up in the hands of organized crime. Further details were published last year and can be found on the Stop US Arms to Mexico website. Thank you very much. I stop share. Okay.
Thank you so much, Carlo. So we've heard the beginning of what on the export side, on where the weapons are coming from. And as you heard, more than from any other country, there are weapons going to Mexico from Italy. But another major provider of firearms to Mexican police and military forces is Israel. And to hear more about that, we turn to Sahar Vardi, who is an Israeli anti-occupation and anti-militarist activist. She is the Israel program manager for the American Friends Service Committee and is currently working on an online database that is documenting Israeli arms exports globally. So thank you, Sahar.
Thank you. So I'll speak a little bit about Israel's role in this, just to start by saying, as John said, Israel is one of the big exporter of small arms to Mexico. It's the fourth biggest, with about 8% of the small arms exported to Mexico coming from Israel. And when I say from Israel, it's a bit more complicated than that, because some of these weapons are really manufactured here in Israel, but others are manufactured in the US. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we go into that, just a few words about Israel's arms industry general, because I think it is important to mention it, just because Israel is relatively a rather small country with a very large military export. We're talking about the 8th biggest exporter of arms in the world in absolute numbers, or the number one exporter of arms per capita in the world. And just to say that one of the reasons that Israel is so, let's say, successful in terms of export when it comes to military industry is that, unlike other countries, it has the ability to market its weapons as battle proven, to market its weapons as, look, they actually are operational constantly on the occupation of the Palestinian people at the expense of Palestinians. So it's just important to kind of put that framing. It's also been a lot of the history of Israel and Mexico when it comes to arms export. Israel has been exporting arms to Mexico from the 70s. We've seen, not only in Mexico, but also in other countries in Central America, Israel exporting arms in periods where other countries were boycotting or had arms embargoes on different countries, in Nicaragua, in Honduras, in Argentina, and Chile. And also we've seen that cooperation for many, many years between Israel and Mexico. And just important to put that framing, because a lot of what we're talking about, obviously, is the human rights violations happening with these weapons. We need to also understand what are the systems and the legal systems that allow or don't allow export of arms to human rights violating situations. And in Israel's case, there is no real legal framework to prevent export of arms to human rights violating countries. And that was true historically, and means that Israeli arms were part of atrocities around the world, but it's also true today. We do not have human rights restrictions on arms exports in this country at all currently. Other than UN arms embargoes, Israel allows itself to sell to more or less everyone. And that really does pose a question when we campaign around these things, when we try to prevent export that is later on used for human rights violations like we're hearing about here today in Mexico. In the Israeli case, we don't actually have that many legal tools, and a lot of it has to be much more kind of the social tools around it. If we do fast forward to today, just a second before I'll speak on small arms, I think it is important to say there are a lot of other forms of military export. Israel sells drones today. 3 of the 5 drones that the Mexican military uses are Israeli drones. It sells spyware to Mexico. Most infamous of that is a company called NSO, whose software has been used by the Mexican government against journalists, against human rights activists, against the commission, the Human Rights Commission that was investigating the Ayotzinapa. And so really we are seeing a lot of that collaboration, unfortunately. When we do come to small arms, we're talking about more or less 10% of Israel's arms export to Mexico is of small arms. So it's relatively a small percentage, but obviously in people's life, as was said here before, that's actually something that's very, very much felt in Mexico on the ground. So we're talking really about tens of thousands of weapons that are coming from Israel or from the US to, from Israeli companies to Mexico. We're talking mostly about weapons from a company called IWI, Israeli Weapons Industries. It used to be a governmentally owned company. Now it has been privatized. And for the most part, we're talking about 2 specific kinds of weapons. It's called the Galil and the Tavo. They are both semi to fully automatic assault rifles, 5.56 millimeter calibers. So we're really talking about military grade weapons. And they are, for the most part, the ones that are being transferred and sold to Mexican police, but also to Mexican, to Mexican military, but also to Mexican police. And as was said here before, this is not just a question of how much of them are used, and we know they are used by police later on when these weapons are lost, and we find them quite often in the hands of cartels. We know these weapons are used both for killing people, for threatening, as was said before. But I think it's also, just the fact that they are, again, military grade that is used on a daily basis. Israeli weapons are used by DF police in Guerrero and Veracruz. Veracruz, I believe a lot of the people here know much more than I do about, but really is one of the places where we've seen death squads killing people. Just between 2013 and 2014, there were 15 people killed by police, mostly youth. And so we're seeing the use of these weapons really everywhere. There's a lot to say on that, but I think really the important thing is a question of how do we restrict these arms? How do we find, especially in cases like in Israel, where there isn't a legal framework to restrict arms to human rights abuses, how do we find other ways in which civil society can really affect that? And on that, I will leave it back to you, John.
Thank you so much, Sahar. Your discussion about the Israeli weapons, similar to what we heard from Danielle, shows how these are military weapons that are going to law enforcement and are a part of an escalation of conflict, of violence within Mexico to a military level. Next, we're going to hear from another activist in a weapons exporting nation from Belgium. We turn to Martes van den Bosch, who is a peace activist working with the Belgian organization vredesakte, I'm sure I didn't say that right, which translates to peace action. I will also just reiterate that anyone listening in Spanish, alguien que está esperando en español, pues puede entrar al Zoom y puede escuchar la interpretación simultánea al español al apretar el botón del globo debajo de la pantalla. So we welcome people who are listening in Spanish as well. Martes, we look forward to hearing from you.
Right, thank you, John. So I will talk a bit about the Belgian involvement in this story now. And when we take a look at military transactions, Belgium exports almost nothing but firearms and to a lesser extent also ammunition towards Mexico. And in the case of Belgium, this principally involves one company, it's FN Herstal, and it's one of Europe's biggest producers of military firearms. And it's also fully owned by the Walloon government. So since the legislation and the regulation of arms trade in Belgium is a regional competence, it's also this same Walloon government that is responsible for licensing these exports. And they have licensed quite a lot. So since 2008, Belgium has licensed the export of firearms to Mexico for over 100 million euros. And that's more than any other European country. But not only the volume, but also the timing of these exports is very remarkable. I will just share my screen to show you one graphics. And voilà, here you can clearly see how the Walloon government approved huge firearms exports to Mexico at the moment that the homicide rate attained historical heights in Mexico. So this is once in 2011 and again in 2017. Although in 2017, it's good to note it's not a peak because the homicide rates are still rising now. The Walloon government doesn't like to talk too much about these exports, but these figures here, they indicate two possibilities. Or they don't take the human rights situation in Mexico into account at the moment of granting the licenses. And they are more concerned with the profits and the jobs that stay in Belgium. Or the other, and this is of course extremely problematic, or the other possibility is that they consider that more guns in the hands of Mexican authorities will allow them to better control and reduce the widespread violence in the country. And voilà, as the upcoming report that will be published in 2 weeks with a lot more details clearly shows, also this assumption it's equally problematic basically. So if we take a look at the Belgian exports, we see that the bulk of these exports are light and heavy machine guns that are destined for the army. But thanks to the documents that Global Exchange could retrieve, we know that also a portion of these guns ended up in the hands of the police. And there it concerns specific models that are also of almost exclusive use for the police. Or at least that's the official story. It turns out that more than the half of these guns were destined for the police in Jalisco. And Jalisco is one of the states that has a very bad reputation when it comes to losing guns. I think since 2006, 800 guns were reported as lost or stolen by the police in Jalisco. So it's quite safe to say that some of these Belgian guns exported to the police, they were bound to get lost. They seem to resurface in some documents from Sedena that include a very long list of FN weapons that are retrieved in crime scenes. So this means guns that were used in organized crime, in criminal circuits. Now, the curious thing is that the top models on these lists, they are the same as the top models that were destined for the police. From these weapons that I recovered on the crime scenes, it's quite possible and even very probable that a good share of this are smuggled over from the US. But there are very good reasons to also assume and know that also the Mexican police, the local police, plays a crucial role in channeling guns from European factories towards drug cartels in Mexico. So once again, the report that will be published in 2 weeks will explain this with a lot more detail. No? But the thing is that these observations, they confirm a bit the systemic nature of some observations that were already made last year in an investigative project that's called Belgian Arms, and that included quite some journalists. And I will show you one more pictures of this. Here, for example, you see one of the guns that is shown here is a Belgian machine gun, an FN gun, which is retrieved during the confiscation of the arsenal of drug cartels in Mexico. Another FN weapon that is very popular, very widely used among the drug cartels is the FN57. Within the drug cartels, it's nicknamed the Mata Policías. And curiously enough, this is also the top model that Belgium has exported to the police. So here we clearly see that these guns end up being used against the state forces they were in the first place exported to. Now, it's good to say that these guns are used. For example, this is another photo of an FN weapon that was used against a police officer. No, this was used for an attack on the chief of police by the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación. So the thing is, these weapons end up targeting both state forces. They target journalists. They target human rights defenders. So it's safe to say that these exported guns, they are not employed to break the patterns of violence in Mexico. And I think the main conclusion is also that it's time to abandon the idea that any weapon can. The risk that weapons end up in the wrong hands, this is a clear legal cutoff point. The EU common position draws various lines, and this is one of those lines. So stopping the sales of small arms to Mexico is the only credible contribution to restoring a sense of security in Mexico. All right, I give it back to you, John.
Thank you so much, Matthijs. I think your account of how Belgian weapons have ended up with criminal organizations is really key to the argument that these weapons exports should be ended. And I would add that sometimes it's not just that the weapons might be diverted to criminal organizations, but that often police that keep the weapons are colluding with criminal organizations. So even if the weapons stay with the police, if the police are colluding with those criminal organizations, then they are feeding the criminal enterprise that is destroying so many lives in Mexico. So to hear from another experience in a weapons exporting country, we turn to Charlotte Kenne, who works for the German non-governmental organization Ohne Rüstung leben, or Living Without Weapons, on arms control issues. And she is one of the spokespeople of the German-wide campaign called Aktion Aufschrei, Stop, I'm not going to do this right, Stop den Waffenhandel, which might translate as Action Outcry, Stop the Arms Trade. So I turn it over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you very much. So now in the next minutes, I would like to give a very brief overview over German small arms exports to Mexico, and thereby I will especially focus on one example that is very striking for the German debate, and this is the export of G36 rifles to Mexico. Since 2000, the German government repeatedly approved the export to Mexico of small arms and light weapons, such as pistols, submachine guns, assault rifles, as well as portable anti-tank weapons. And between 2006 and 2009, Heckler & Koch exported more than 10,000 G36 assault rifles to Mexico. These rifles were destined for police units in different Mexican states. But due to the human rights concerns, 4 states, Guerrero, Jalisco, Chiapas, and Chihuahua, were not supposed to be supplied with weapons according to the official German arms export licenses. However, since 2010, journalists, human rights, and peace activists revealed that thousands of the exported G36 ended up in exactly these states. In 2010, a German activist, Jürgen Gresslin, and his lawyer, Holger Rothbauer, also filed a criminal complaint. And all this ultimately led to the criminal conviction in 2019 of former Heckler & Koch employees due to illegal arms export. And the company should also pay a fine equal to the entire revenue from the illegal Mexico sales, which is about 3.7 million euros. Parties of the proceedings appealed the decision, and the case, so the next level now is the Germany's Federal Court of Justice. Since 2010, or since the end of 2010, Germany has adopted a policy that mostly stops small arms exports to Mexico, but there are also some very worrying exemptions that undermine the credibility of this step. For example, in 2018, Mexico's Arms Trade Treaty report indicates the importation of more than 4,000 portable anti-tank weapons from Germany. So just this as a first overview of the developments, and now I'm going to talk a bit more about the Heckler & Koch case and the trial in a bit more detail. The case Heckler & Koch is a case in which peace activists, human rights defenders, and critical journalists created enough pressure to bring Heckler & Koch to trial. And the trial and the media coverage around it significantly increased the public awareness of such irresponsible exports. But the trial had also 2 central weaknesses, in my opinion, or in the opinion of the organization I'm working for. The German licensing authorities were not held responsible, and the human consequences of these illegal exports were not considered in the trial. The licensing authorities allowed the export of the G36 rifles to Mexico on the basis of end-use certificates that listed only Mexican states that they considered as unproblematic. But the trial revealed also that instead of really exercising control, some officials even informed Heckler & Koch which states to remove from the end-use certificates in order to make the export possible. So the Heckler & Koch case clearly shows that the idea of limiting the end use of exported assault rifles regionally within Mexico did not work, and given the human rights situation, Mexico should not have received any German small arms at all. Yeah, and one case which shows the devastating consequences of these arms transfers is the Ayotzinapa case. Police forces in Iguala, Guerrero used the G36 rifles in the attack on the students of the Ayotzinapa Normal School in September 2014. And according to official export permits, these arms should have never been in Guerrero. Maybe to come closely to an end, as I've already said in the beginning, after 2010, Germany has adopted a policy that mostly stops small arms exports to Mexico. But of course, this had not an effect on the arms already exported. And there were these worrying exceptions that I've mentioned. And therefore, Germany should consequently stop small arms and light weapons exports to Mexico. Also because, as like it was already mentioned before, such transfers contradict existing criteria on arms export decisions on the national and the European level. As a last point, I would like to mention that the German government must also address the internationalization strategy of German weapons manufacturers, such as Sig Sauer. Sig Sauer operates internationally and has subsidiaries, for example, in Germany and the US, that are 100% owned by the L&O Sig Sauer holding based in Germany. So exports that would not have been allowed from Germany can be handled by Sig Sauer in the US. And recently, Sig Sauer announced the closure of its German production site by the end of this year, but nevertheless, the profits, they still flow to German owners. And the connection between Sig Sauer and Germany and Sig Sauer US has also drawn the attention to the possibility of illegal arms exports. For example, in April this year, Holger Rothbauer filed another criminal complaint against Sig Sauer on behalf of the German-wide campaign Aktienaufschrei Stopp den Waffenhandel. There is suspicion that weapons and weapon parts produced or developed in Germany were illegally exported via the US to Colombia, Nicaragua, and Mexico. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Very important experience of the prosecution against Heckler & Koch's for Heckler & Koch for its exports to Mexico. And so I'm now going to explore this issue a little bit more of the ways in which European companies have turned to the United States in order to expand their markets. So this was mentioned by Sahar, as well as, this applies to basically all of the countries we're discussing today. So in addition to Sig Sauer, these are all European or Israeli-based companies that have set up production within the United States. Sig Sauer, which comes from Germany, IWI from Israel, Glock, which comes from Austria, FN, Herstal, which comes from Belgium, CZ, USA, which comes from the Czech Republic, Beretta from Italy, Heckler & Koch from Germany, as well as Walther, also from Germany. A lot of them, they are, in large part, they are supplying a domestic market within the United States, because the United States is unique in that although it is only about 4% of the world's population, it owns nearly half of the firearms in civilian hands around the world. So these companies want to take advantage of that market, but in addition, they are also taking advantage of much looser firearms export regulations and laws within the United States. And those regulations have become even looser this year under the Trump administration, which we can talk about more. So I want to explore in particular the case of Sig Sauer that Charlotte mentioned, which, as she said, is wholly German owned, but they set up a subsidiary in the 1980s in the state of New Hampshire, which is just north of Boston. And over the course of the 8-year period from 2007 to 2015, they began selling weapons to Mexico that were then sold by the Mexican army to police forces all around the country in 19 different states. In the year 2014, Sig Sauer in New Hampshire greatly expanded its manufacturing capacity. And the following year signed a license for an enormous amount of firearms shipments to the Mexican Navy. These included not just handguns, but also, which are the primary weapon that are sold to Mexican police, but also assault rifles for use by the Mexican Navy. in the spring of 2018, Sig Sauer weapons were transferred to Mexican naval special forces, which participated in a number of disappearances, forced disappearances in the town of Nuevo Laredo. And I will come back to that in just a moment. So this license to export up to $265 million worth of firearms and firearm parts included a license for manufacturing in Mexico. And there was a question in the chat about whether any of these exports include an authority or capacity to assemble or manufacture within Mexico, because Heckler and Koch, the Mexican army, did you begin to produce its own version of Heckler and Koch rifles about 10 years ago. In the case of Sig Sauer, there is an authority to assemble firearms. So in this, on the bottom half of this slide, you can see an excerpt of a license, the license for the Mexican Navy, and it is an MLA license, which means manufacturing license agreement. So, and in the period after this license was issued, the number of parts that were shipped from Sig Sauer to Mexico grew enormously, more than $25 million worth. In the subsequent period, the Mexican Navy Special Forces began to use Sig Sauer rifles, and here we see pictures of them participating in an exercise in California in 2018. This is Jessica Molina, whose husband was disappeared by Mexican Navy Special Forces in Nuevo Laredo. She has been very vocal because the Navy came in to their home in the middle of the night, said they were looking for someone. They gave a different name from her husband, but they nevertheless took her husband and another man who was staying with them, who was a migrant who was about to pass over the border, neither of whom had anything to do with organized crime, and then they were never seen again. These were two of several dozen forced disappearances that have resulted in a recommendation or ruling by the Mexican Human Rights Commission, but nevertheless, no one in the Navy has been held account. In addition, in the state police forces of Tamaulipas, the Sig Sauer has sold weapons to the state forces. In 2014 and 2016, there were 450 Sig Sauer pistols that were sold to those forces, and subsequently, state police conducted a massacre in September of last year. These are family members of some of those people who were killed. The police have been accused but not tried for that crime. So we don't have evidence of exactly what weapons were used in those crimes, but nevertheless, the transfer of weapons to police forces that are committing egregious crimes is wrong, and as we articulate in our recommendations, should be stopped. Now, I mentioned that the regulations for export from the United States have become looser this year. The exporters no longer need to notify the State Department, the Congress. So the exporter applies for a license now from the Commerce Department instead of the State Department. The review is much less rigorous. The controls on end users are much less rigorous. There is no notification to Congress, so neither Congress nor the public is going to be aware of these exports. The end use inspections, so after the shipment, there is much less interest or structure for actually inspecting where the weapons went. And given the record in Mexico, this is a very serious problem. Last week, the state government of New Hampshire approved a $21 million subsidy to Sig Sauer. It's a loan guarantee to Sig Sauer to expand its production within New Hampshire, and Sig Sauer during the pandemic has been increasing its exports around the world. Sig Sauer has exported in the last 5 years to more than 80 countries, and those exports have only increased last year and this year during the pandemic. So we are calling for a suspension of exports from the European countries and Israel, but also from the United States to Mexico during this period. And we are, until that takes place, we are calling for a great strengthening on end-use controls, which we will spell out in our report, which comes out on December 9th. So I want to invite all of the people who are attending today to submit any questions or comments in the chat or in the question and answer section that you can find on the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to respond to them. There is one question, I believe it is directed to Sahar, about whether any of the arms that are given by Israel or sold by Israel are related to US aid to Israel. So is there any link to be made to the enormous multi-billion-dollar military assistance package annually from the United States to Israel, to these weapon sales from Israel to Mexico?
So from the $3.8 billion a year that the U.S. gives to Israel, most of that money has to be used to buy weapons from U.S. manufacturers, and in a few years, all of that money will be that. So in that sense, we can actually pretty clearly say that no, this money can't be used for the most part, for any Israeli buying any Israeli manufacturing. And so it will also not be these weapons that are sold. It has a larger effect on supporting Israel's arms industry, which, you know, in general picture obviously affects that. But we can't say that this is the money that would be funding the manufacturing of these weapons.
So it sounds like we have some big tasks in front of us in order to bring those things under control, since there's no end-use controls, there's none of those restrictions on Israeli arms sales, nor is there a kind of a link or a wedge in through the US assistance. So there's another question here from Pat Westwater Jong. I'm not sure if I've said your name right. Whether anyone can give specific examples of these guns being used against journalists or students. Daniel, I'm wondering if any of the research of the Mexican Commission, whether you can address that. I believe the Ayotzinapa case would be one, but maybe there are others that you can speak to.
Well, the Ayotzinapa case is the most well-known case, where well the German weapons were detected, but this is really information that is really hard to find because there is almost no documentation. When you read the National Ombudsman recommendations, they never talk about the weapons used by the responsible authorities. They just say like things like the municipal police from this place or the state police, but they rarely put attention on the weapons used. The only way to know this, it would be to check on the N certificates, which we know are not necessarily very clear data sources, but it is mainly like a future research project, I think.
Right. Yeah, I'll elaborate on that. One of the challenges of working on this is that most crimes in Mexico, most violent crimes, are not investigated. So if there is no investigation, then there is no judicial record. In addition, if no one responsible is arrested, it is typical that a firearm is not recovered. So without a judicial record, without a firearm recovered in the crime, it is very difficult to trace firearms that are going to police or are going to private parties in Mexico to specific crimes. However, one of the things that we are saying is that you don't need to trace a weapon to a specific crime in order to conclude that the weapons should not be going to entities that are involved in criminal acts, even if we don't know whether the specific firearm that came from you know, a specific company was used in that crime. So there's some more questions here. One is, could you describe exactly who is in charge of bringing weapons to Mexico? What is the path that they follow? Not sure if someone wants to take that on. Anyone want to respond to that? Well, one thing I can say in response to that question is that the companies, it depends on the exporting country exactly what process they need to follow. But in Europe and in the United States, at least, they must obtain a license. In the United States, they obtain that license now from the Commerce Department. That requires, in Mexico, the only importing entity is the Mexican Army, known by its acronym of SEDENA. SEDENA makes a request to the exporting company. The exporting company then obtains the license with documentation from SEDENA. That documentation should show the end user, but typically does not. With European countries, there are end-use certificates that are part of the license process that sometimes show who the end users will be, although they are often not very specific in terms of how many weapons of what kind are going to which end user, and they're not complete. There's another question here. How would, this is from Jeff Abramson from Forum on the Arms Trade. How would you rate the public understanding of these issues within the supplier countries in which you live, you as the presenters? Is this relatively unknown, or is there a growing awareness? So any of you, how would you respond to that question?
I can give it a shot if no. Oh, Charlotte, go ahead.
Maybe I can just give a brief example from Germany. I think in Germany, due to the Heckler and Koch case and also due to this lot of work of a lot of journalists, it is in Germany. Is it well known that the topic? This is my impression. Yeah.
I'd add that, I mean, from the Israeli perspective, honestly, generally, arms export is hardly a conversation, and only in the last few years have there been campaigns around it. And they've really only managed to get any traction on it in the situations where there's been, you know, selling arms to Myanmar or South Sudan, like really extreme situations where there are embargoes from other countries. Only then have we managed to really get some public traction around that. And I think cases like Mexico, where, you know, it's much harder to make the case and you don't see global arms embargoes, at the moment it's hardly a conversation, but there are groups here trying to raise that, and slowly it is getting a little bit more into media with a lot of push from civil society here. But generally speaking, I wouldn't say it's much of a discourse, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think to speak from Belgium, the fact that weapons go to Mexico is not a known fact. I think Also, basically, the reporting on the situation in Latin America is not very common in Belgium. I think some cases of arms exports, like for example, the exports to Saudi Arabia, have obtained quite some visibility. But for the case of the exports to Mexico, it's quite an unknown thing. There have been journalists who have published about this. And I hope in 2 weeks with the publication of the report, in collaboration with journalist collectives, could help raise the issue and put it on the agenda. But for the moment, I think the public awareness about it is rather small.
Carlo, in Italy, is there much awareness of this issue?
No, in my opinion, in my experience, the debate about arms exports in Italy is very difficult to open on the media. Probably in the next month there are the emission and the transmission about these items on public TV, but it's a case very rare. And generally, public opinion about this arm exporting is a lot positive. Yes, we have to export arms in all the world because this is work for a lot of people, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs 10 decades ago opened a special office in the ministry for helping the companies that want to export. So it's a state business also when there are private and company and manufacturers, so but sustained by the state with also the insurance of foreign affairs is managed by a state entity, very important because the capital is very heavy.
Yes, I think I would say probably in all of the exporting countries, we find this challenge of the economic interests often dominating the state agencies. Daniel Samora Parnell asks whether any police, for the weapons that police have received and then have been diverted to criminals or have ended up in criminal hands, whether police have ever been held accountable or prosecuted for those diversions. Can you speak to that?
Yes. Well, there's when a firearm is stolen or lost, the institution that lost that reports the weapon lost has the duty to inform the Mexican army, the Sedena. And it is allegedly there is an investigation that will try to recover the firearm, but what I have seen in every time we send information, transparency information request, is that they have no info about how many guns or firearms are recovered. So it's very likely that nothing happens. Maybe just how do you say multa?
A fine.
Maybe just a fine, but they never answer where the firearms end up.
Yeah, it's a very serious problem with impunity on many levels. So there's a couple more questions for Sahar. One is whether there's any prospect of Israel ratifying the Arms Trade Treaty. which she also asks for the United States, and I can respond to that. In the United States, the Biden campaign said that they would sign it. The ratification requires congressional approval, which in our current environment is not likely because of the number of Republicans in the US Senate. And then one other question for you, Sahar, is specifically about whether, let me see if this question, oh, I see, you answered it in the chat. So Sahar, is there anything more you might say about the arms trade treaty and the potential for Israel's implementation of it?
Yeah, I would not be optimistic about it. I mean, Israel was very clear from the get-go that the signing it or ratifying it is not really on the horizon. The main issue is not wanting to legitimize arms boycotts towards Israel. I mean, Israel knowing its own clear disregard of human rights and international law when it comes to operations mostly against Palestinians, but not only, is very much afraid of the idea of arms embargoes, less because it will leave it with less arms and more because of the political symbolism of it. And therefore doesn't want to sign treaties like that could be eventually used against it and in a way legitimize them. So really kind of nothing to do with Mexico or other human rights violating countries. I don't see Israel ratifying that. I do like to be a bit more optimistic about what is possible. There are slowly shifts, and there have been a few pieces of legislation pushed in the last few years to try to at least include within Israeli law, outside of the international treaties, at least inside the Israeli law, to include gross human rights violations as part of the restrictions to arms export, which I believe it is possible to try to pass that in the next few years, hopefully, if I'm trying to be optimistic as well.
It's something we work on in the US as well, is that sometimes when we can't get federal action, we looked to the states within the United States. So the same thing, sometimes if we can't get the ratification of an international treaty, then there might be federal action that could be taken at the national level. So I want to read a couple more comments, and then we'll do one last round of our panelists. One comment is from the Binational Mexico Solidarity Project, which is offering to collaborate on a campaign with our various organizations represented here. There is a question here from the US arms companies like Lockheed and Boeing, why manufacturers from other countries are operating in the US. And again, I would say that they want to supply the US domestic market, and they want to export from the US, which is easier in many respects than exporting from European countries. There are gun companies in the US that are also exporting to Mexico, which we have addressed in some other events. So all of these companies are supplying this very large, unfortunately, very large Mexican market for firearms. There's a comment from Wolf-Dieter Vogel about a 6-hour firearm that was used in the murder of Marisela Escobedo, who was an activist in the state of Chihuahua, who was seeking justice for her daughter, who was killed, and she herself was then killed using a 6-hour pistol. And there's a comment and a question from Jürgen Graslin, who is the coordinator of Acción in Germany, who says that because of the criminal complaint against 6-hour for exports to Mexico, Colombia, and Nicaragua, the head of 6-hour, his name is Ron Cohen, who is an Israeli citizen, by the way, may face conviction, and he might refuse to come to Germany. And he asks whether there is an extradition agreement between the United States and Germany. I believe there probably is. I don't know if Charlotte, if you know any more about that. So I will just turn to our panelists one more time for any kind of closing comments. Danielle?
Sorry, I lost connection. What?
If you have any closing comment.
No.
Okay, thank you. Carlo, anything you want to close with today?
So a comment is a great work we have to publish now, but also is a unique experience for me that several countries are involved in the research like this, that shows that the problem, the issue, the central issue is the international cooperation. But this is the problem, the great problem, because ATT courses showed that there are conflicting interests between producers and countries like United States, China, Italy, Brazil, Turkey are now leaders in the small armor markets, and this is connected for the great defense industry. So we touch now the problem, and Mexico have to insert. We have to insert Mexico in the list of the dangerous country with great. I used the word a river of weapons. Yes, a great river of weapons for many years. This is same problem there are in some country in Africa, in Asia, in Middle East, obviously, but the international community have not great attention to this, but they prefer speak about laws and articles, laws, commas, and interpretation of the laws. This is the difficult for activists and researchers, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo. Very important. Matis, do you have any closing comment?
One thing that once again became obvious when working together with all the organizations on this work and on the reports was that the European common position, that in a way it's intended to bring some coherence to the export policies of European countries, doesn't achieve to do so. No? There's too much difference in ways to enforce this legislation, too much difference in the scope, difference in the ways it's being implemented. So for example, here we see Italy, for example, doesn't include the weapons sold to Mexican police into the exports that have to be checked with the criteria. Only Germany finds reasons to difficult the export of firearms to Mexico, while all the other states continue to export. No? So the only thing we can say now is that in spite of the common position, all the European countries almost continue to export. And I hope that through cooperation, we can get to a moment where we can say, because of the common position, the exports to Mexico have stopped. Voilà.
Thank you, Matis. Charlotte?
Yes, I would like to reinforce what Matis already said, and I also wanted to say again, thank you also for organizing like this whole event, because I think it became quite clear also in the inputs that the small arms industry starts or is internationalizing. So I think it's great that we also have this collaboration here with the groups and this this debate and exchange. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Sahar, any last comment?
Just reiterating what everyone says and really saying that like a lot of the follow-up from this, I mean, the idea of talking about this issues is obviously to get people involved in them. And so when the report comes out, I mean, it is important to kind of follow up with this and see how in the different contexts in the different countries we're talking about and in cooperation between them, we can really challenge these policies.
Yeah, we hope that the publication of our report on December 9th will draw increased attention to this issue, as well as to the potential policies that all of the countries, including Mexico, can and should carry out. There was one other question coming in from YouTube about the use of end-use certificates. If weapons are lost or stolen, what good is the end-use certificate? In fact, that is an important reason why to have end-use certificates. If a police force like the state police in Guerrero lose or have stolen from them 20% of their weapons, then that would be a reason for in the future not to export where they are the end users. And the end user certificates are the mechanism by which the exporting country can determine where the weapons are supposed to be going and whether they are going to an end user that should be excluded. And if there's no end use system, then there really shouldn't be any exports at all. So we want to thank all of you for being with us today. We will be posting our report on December 9th. We will be reaching out to folks who registered for this webinar. It will be posted on stopusarmstomexico.org. I also want to thank Rompeviento TV, Global Exchange, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, all of the organizations that participated in this report. I want to give a shout out to Sarah Reeder, who created some of the graphics that we used and presented today. And thank all of you for your work. And we look forward to connecting with you in the future. Thanks so much.